Today, I have the privilege of introducing Mrs. Meera Balachandran to you. She's been a teacher and a principal for more than 35 years. She's authored few books and she's been a teacher trainer for CBSE as well as British Council. She has imparted teacher training not only in India but to abroad also to teachers. Right now, she is the National Director for Education Quality Foundation of India, which is an NGO, which is working in the area of teacher training, large-scale assessments, and checking and maintaining the quality of the education. However, if I start talking about Meera ma'am, then it will go on. The introduction could go on further. But today we are here to hear her opinion and some very important tips about Bloom's taxonomy, how it works, and in what way teachers can get maximum advantage from Bloom's taxonomy as far as designing and planning the lessons is concerned. So over to you, Meera ma'am. Could you please, Meera ma'am, you need to unmute. You need to unmute yourself.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, now you're audible, ma'am. Yes.
Ah.
So, ma'am, our teachers are all, very, very eager to listen to you. So, could you please start with explaining to them what exactly Bloom's taxonomy is?
Okay. Good evening, everybody, and it's lovely to talk to teachers. I always enjoy interacting with teachers, and I'm very happy that NEPA has given me this opportunity to talk to teachers in far off Ladakh. And I've been hearing so much about the work that you people are doing and your enthusiasm and your motivation to really teach English in the way it should be taught. And NEPA had asked me to speak on Bloom's taxonomy. I think most of you at some stage in your B.Ed or M.Ed, you must have come across this term, Bloom's taxonomy. But right now, what we're going to do is, when we do B.Ed and M.Ed, we tend to take this as a theoretical form. But really, if you look at Bloom's taxonomy very carefully, you'll understand that it's something that can be applied to day-to-day teaching. So that's what I'm going to take up. First, I'll do a little short, I'll show you a presentation. And as I go on the presentation, I will go along. I hope, NEPA, I have time. If I'm exceeding time, do stop me on it.
Sure,
and you
no
can ask
problem.
me questions in
No
between.
problem,
All right. Shall I put my presentation?
Please, ma'am. Please.
Bloom's taxonomy, actually, it was in the 1950s that Benjamin Bloom actually thought of the taxonomy of educational objectives. We were always teaching, and we had a lot of objectives or a lot of aims when we were teaching. But suddenly they realized that, we need to have some sort of framework. We need to have some sort of framework which tells us how we should move maybe from the lowest level to the highest level. So there's been a lot of change since the first Bloom's taxonomy came in. The first one actually began with knowledge, comprehension, application, analysis, synthesis, and evaluation. So we'll just see what these were actually. Knowledge, they said, was, everybody knows about knowledge because for years we've been teaching and giving children information. But we've not been going far beyond the information because we've been giving information and testing information. But now we are moving from information to understanding or comprehension. That is not just information, but also trying to find out, has the child understood what we've given? Is the knowledge of any use to the child? Can he understand and use it in some way or the other? And that's when we come to the next term, that is application. So you have knowledge, you understand that knowledge, and then you apply that knowledge to various situations. So using that knowledge has helped you to sort out certain problems, to sort out certain issues. And that's why we come to the next stage, that is application. And then application is followed by the next stage, that is analysis. What is analysis? Analysis is actually breaking down of ideas. You get your ideas, you have your knowledge, and then you break it into smaller and smaller and smaller parts so that the children or the students you're teaching really begin to understand the application of that knowledge and the comprehension of that knowledge and the analysis of that knowledge. Then once you've analyzed that knowledge, then you come into the synthesis. That is, okay, I know this part of the knowledge. I know this part of the knowledge. I know that these are the tenses. I know the different types of tenses, but then I can apply all the tenses, my present, past, and future together. I synthesize all of them, and I'm able to write a paragraph that has all the three tenses in it. So what have I done? From my knowledge of tenses, I've gone on to understanding of tenses. I've started applying that. I've started analyzing that. And then I've started synthesizing the three tenses to create a paragraph. And then you come to evaluation. Have I done it correctly? Is it correct what I've done? Do I need to look at it again? This was the initial or the first original Bloom's taxonomy. Even today, it's almost the same, but the only thing is the headings or the titles for each of the stages have changed. And what is the change that has come in? Now we say remember. Instead of saying knowledge, we say remember. That is, you're given a lot of facts, you have to remember those facts. But remembering is not enough, because if you remember, you cannot just use those facts. So you remember, and then you start understanding those facts. I've learned about tenses. I now know about tenses. I know about clauses. I know about various aspects of grammar. I can understand, when I look at a sentence, I can understand whether it is in the present tense or the past tense or the future tense. So I remember what are the tenses. I understand what are the tenses. Then I apply. I start thinking, oh, I want to write something about something that happened. So I'm going to write it in the past tense. So I'm applying my knowledge or what I remember about tenses to create something or to write something. Then as I write, I analyze. I analyze to see that am I using the right form of the tense? Am I using the simple present tense? Am I using the continuous present tense? Am I using the perfect present tense? And the same applies to the past tense and the future tense. So I'm analyzing whatever knowledge I have, whatever I remember about tenses, I'm analyzing whether I'm actually applying it in the correct manner. Am I doing it in the correct manner? So that is the next step. So what are you doing? First is remembering what are tenses, understanding what are tenses, applying what are tenses, then analyzing that, am I doing it correctly? Analyzing and also evaluating. You're constantly evaluating. You're standing by a decision you've taken. I have used this. Am I correct in using this? Should this be what I should have used, or should I change it? If I'm talking about something that happened in the past, is it correct that I'm using it? Or am I talking about something that's happening in the present? So I have to justify what my usage is. So that is where the evaluation comes in. And the highest level of Bloom's taxonomy is create. That is to make something new, so create something. Now, all of you know, if you're familiar with the 21st century skills, that creativity has become one of the most important skills today in the 21st century. We say we don't teach children just to remember. We don't teach children just to convey knowledge. We teach children to apply that knowledge, to analyze that knowledge, and then on the basis of that knowledge, to create something new. So that is why creation is put right at the top. I mean, when I'm digressing a bit, I'm moving away a bit, but when we talk of creation, we also talk of critical thinking. That's where the analysis comes in. So whatever knowledge we have, we are also looking at it critically. We are evaluating it. And once we have evaluated it and we have created it, then we actually create something new. So these are the main steps in Bloom's taxonomy. Now, why is it important for you as a teacher? Why should I know this as a teacher? Okay, I know that when a child learns, she moves from remember to understand, to apply, to analyze, to evaluate, to create. But as a teacher, how is it useful for me? I know I've got to take the child through these steps, but how do I take the child through these steps? When I teach, what do? I write my lesson plans. I create lesson plans. So when I write my lesson plans, I write my objectives for the lesson plans. So what are the objectives? Through this lesson, this is what I am going to achieve. So if this is going to what I'm going to achieve, how should I write my lesson plan? So we move, the base is the Bloom's taxonomy. From there, we move to what we call the learning objectives. How do I, as a teacher, I'm a teacher of English, I teach class 6 or I teach class 7. I've got a particular chapter in English. It's a lesson, a literature lesson, or I'm teaching grammar. But how do I write down my objectives so that I know that at the end of the lesson, my children will know this about this lesson. My children will know this about grammar. So we go on to how do we write learning objectives using Bloom's taxonomy. Why do we need a learning objective? We need a learning objective because when we have a learning objective, we are very clear about why we are teaching, what we are teaching. Then we also need a learning objective to observe the learning outcome for each activity. I'm teaching. When I'm teaching, I'm not telling the children that I'm going to teach you this so that you will learn this. I'm doing an activity, but as a teacher, I have to be very clear that through this activity, I will achieve this objective. I will be able, my children, when they do this activity, will be able to write a sentence in a particular tense at the end of this activity. My students will be able to write a paragraph combining the tenses at the end of this activity. So I have to observe the learning outcome first. So activities cannot be in isolation. Every activity that you take up in the class, we say today learning should be very active. We want an active approach to teaching. But an active approach means also defining your objectives. As a teacher, you are a specialist in the subject. The child doesn't know, but you are a specialist who's going to ensure that every activity you take up will have a learning objective. And that learning objective will be achieved. And after that learning objective is achieved, you will evaluate whether that learning objective has been achieved. So Bloom's taxonomy helps you to define purpose. It helps you to define the learning outcome for each activity, and then to decide what is the learning activity that has been achieved, what is the learning that has been achieved, and how can that be evaluated. So every lesson of yours needs a learning objective. The Bloom's taxonomy provides guidance. It tells us how do we draw up this learning objective. We must make sure one is every learning objective can be measured. Okay, I have got Rajesh, Rama, and Renu in the class. Can I measure and see how much has Rajesh learned? How much has Renu learned? How much has Ravi learned? Can I do that? If I cannot do that, then my objective is not, I cannot apply that objective. So it has to be measurable. That's very, very important. Then, is it learner-centered? Is it teacher-oriented and only the teacher speaking and teacher doing everything? Or are the children learning from it? Are the children picking up something from it? So one, it should be measurable. Two, it must be learner-centered. And third, it must indicate a desired level of performance. I want at the end of 45 minutes, my at least 30 or 14 students in the class should have reached a desired level of performance. That is, they can identify or they can say, what is this that I wanted to teach? It is very important. Maybe 100% of the children cannot do it, but at least 60, 70, 80% of the children have reached a desired level of performance. So Bloom's taxonomy helps you to draw up the learning objectives, ensuring it is measurable, it is learner-centered, and it helps you achieve a desired level of performance. Now, what are the hierarchical things? There are 6 levels. We've already said that. The lowest is memorization, remember, and the highest is creative thinking. So when we write our objective, for each objective, we have to be write it very carefully, and we have to see that it can be achieved. Each objective for clarity must use corresponding verbs. Now, why I'm telling you this? Because sometimes, when we are writing an objective, we do not know the exact language to use. So my presentation, I'm not going to go through it in detail, but it will show you at each level, what are some of the verbs that you can use when you're writing your objective. If you're talking about remembering, what are the objectives that what are the verbs that you're going to use? If you're talking about creating, what are the verbs that you're going to use? So let us look at these verbs. For remember, verbs are like list, recite, define, match, label, recognize, retrieve. So you have a lesson and say, all right, list the number of characters in this lesson. List the number of the evil characters in this lesson. So you're listing in that. So you're just writing down the define the area, or define, or what should I say? Define the area in which this particular lesson takes place. So you're really picking out from the lesson and saying, you're not creating anything new, you're remembering from the lesson. Understand. When we want to write an objective that involves understanding, we say, explain. What does the author mean when he says so and so? Can you illustrate the character of this person by giving an example of his behavior? Can you paraphrase the whole chapter or the paragraph in 2 lines? So, and when we are analyzing something, we will tell them to select the information, and we'll say that, okay, this particular chapter has got so much of information. Can you organize it step by step? So that's an analysis of your lesson. So I've taught the children a chapter, I've read that with the children, and I said, now, can you write down the steps in which the story progresses? So it means you have to analyze every step in that lesson. Then evaluate. Okay, you've said this. Can you justify it? Can you say that the steps that you've written are absolutely correct, and that they follow the order, and that what you're writing is correct? And do you have examples to support what you are saying? And the last thing, again, we come to create. Can you plan, after you've read this lesson, can you plan an activity, or can you plan in a group together, or can you compose a poem based on this lesson? So suddenly you're not actually taking information from the lesson, but you're using the lesson as a base to create something new, to develop something new, to invent something new, to build something new. Now, these are all verbs. As a teacher, if I'm writing my lesson objectives, I will use the verbs as according to the lesson and write my objective. At the end of the lesson, my students will be able to convince the audience that this character has acted rightly in the lesson. Or at the end of the lesson, my students will be able to design another story based on the same events, or based on some different events. Or at the end of the lesson, my students will change 1 or 2 events of the story and create a new story from this. So what happens at every stage, you're writing this very clearly in your learning objectives. So that is the way you use the verbs. And it's very important as a teacher to keep these verbs with you in your lesson plan book so that you can keep using them off and on. You didn't use all of them together, but you must use them to justify, and you can always add on to it also. Then, for instance, this is one of the activities. Remember, list down the characters in the lesson you have read. Write down one special observation based on one character. So you've read the lesson, you're writing down the list of characters, and you're writing down your observation about that character. Second, understand. Prepare a flow chart of all that happens in the story. Now, it's very different. It's not that the children are just asked to write. A flow chart means they have to begin at the beginning and go on till the end. So each of the events in the story will follow one to the other. And another thing is summarize the story in just 10 sentences. So these are some of the activities that it is not necessary to do all the activities in one lesson. You can split it up according to your time schedule, get the children into groups sometimes, get them into pairs sometimes, and let them work on these activities. It's not always necessary to give individual activities, because when you give individual activities, you create a sense of fear in the child sometimes. So sometimes to develop confidence, it is good to get children to work in pairs, to get children to work in groups of 4, groups of 3, and so on. Apply, get into groups of 4. There are 4 characters in the story. Take on the role of each character. I am Rahul in the story. You are somebody else, you are somebody else, and I will act like Rahul. So I must know from the story what is the character that Rahul represents. So I will role play that character. Then my group will go in front of the class and act out the whole character, all the 4 characters. So this can be done group-wise. And when you do it group-wise, then the number of presentations are reduced. And then children like working in groups. And as a teacher, you move around to see that all the children are involved. There will always be some children who are very quiet. There will always be some dominating children. So you need to know how to balance that out so that everybody gets a chance. And the ones who are not doing so well and not, you can go there, stand, put your hand on his shoulder, help him to say a few words and become one of the characters. So this is application of the knowledge that you've got or the story that you've read. Analyze, study the information in the lesson. I have read this lesson and I know I can prepare a graph now based on this. I can prepare questionnaires on this. And then what can I do? One group will go to the other group and ask questions, and the other group must try to answer those questions. So you can have an exchange between 2 groups. You can get the children to come up in front. And I believe me, the children will be so involved in the lesson and there'll be so much learning that takes place without your teaching. So actual learning will be taking place with only your guidance and your help, not actually teaching. Instead of telling them, okay, this is the information in the lesson, you're not doing that. You're saying, find the information in the lesson, prepare 5 questions based on that. The other group can ask you 5 questions. This group will ask 5 questions. So you can do it paragraph-wise. You can do it, lesson-wise. You can do it whichever way you want to. Then evaluation, prepare a mind map based on the information provided. A mind map is usually a map which does not follow any order. It could be just the thoughts that come into your mind as you read something. So children can be taught what is a mind map by the teacher working it out on the board. And once the mind map is worked, then they use the information to compare and contrast. They say, okay, this is there, this is there. We must find some alternative solutions. Could she or he have been more successful if she had acted differently? Create, you can prepare a presentation based on the story read. You can develop, describe new solutions or plans. You can take up a research and on the background. Okay, this story is set in Asia during the mid-20s. Can we find out something more about that? Can we find out what used to happen in 1950 in India, in Calcutta, So we'll find out that sort of a thing. So that means you're going away from the story, reading more information, and ultimately you're actually creating something new. So these are some of the activities that I thought of, the hundreds and hundreds of activities that you can plan out. And I think it's good if teachers get into groups and teachers teaching the same class. You have 3 teachers teaching 3 different sections. You can get into groups and you can work out on different areas and share these things, because that way, each person is not repeating on the learning and activity.